I left town for 12 days, just 12. Flew out thinking the biggest problem I'd come back to would be fallen branches on the trail, maybe a fence line needing repair. You know, normal rural stuff. What I came back to instead was a full-blown basketball court. Not like a portable hoop in someone's driveway. I'm talking a 50-foot wide concrete slab, painted lines, polished surface, floodlights bolted into the ground like a damn stadium. And it was sitting right across the middle of my conservation trail. Just planted there, like it had always belonged. Like I was the one out of place. I remember standing there with my bag still in my hand, just staring at it, trying to process how something that permanent, that loud, that aggressively out of character, could appear in a forest I'd spent 2 decades protecting. See, this wasn't just land to me. It was 11 acres of preserved woodland, carefully maintained, legally protected, with a conservation easement that literally restricts what you can and cannot do with the soil. And right through the center of it ran this narrow hiking trail. Been there since the 70s, long before I ever showed up, and I'd made it my responsibility to keep it alive. Clear the debris, manage erosion, protect native plants. All that stuff nobody sees, but everybody benefits from. So yeah, seeing a basketball court sitting on top of it felt less like a mistake and more like a punch to the throat. Now, the people next door, well, the new people, Evan and Marissa Cole, they'd just moved in a couple months earlier. Came in from Seattle, big money energy, closed fast, called their place an eco-retreat, which should have been my first red flag, because whenever someone uses the word eco as branding instead of practice, something's off. First time I met Evan, I was out clearing branches after a storm. Guy jogs up, all smiles, asking about deer patterns, bird migration, acting like he just discovered nature for the first time. I told him I'd been there since 2003, that the trail runs fully inside my property line, and he just nodded like, cool, cool, then jogged off. That was it. No tension, no warning signs, nothing that would prepare me for what I came home to 9 weeks later. So yeah, I pulled out my phone and called him. He picks up immediately, cheerful, like suspiciously cheerful. I said, hey, you poured a basketball court across my trail. And this guy? I swear he laughs. Not nervous laughter. No, like casual, confident. We solved a problem, kind of laughter. He goes, oh yeah, we thought that was just a deer path or something. But hey, you can still walk around it through the brush. It's no big deal. No big deal. I remember that phrase hitting me harder than the concrete. Because that's when it clicked. This wasn't an accident. This was entitlement. I told him straight. That's not a deer path. That's a documented trail on protected land. I have the survey. I have the easement paperwork. You built on property you don't own. And you could hear the shift instantly, like a switch flipped. His voice went cold. Clipped, he says. Our contractor said it was the best flat area available. So if you've got an issue, you can take it up legally. And there it was. That moment where you realize you're not dealing with a misunderstanding. You're dealing with someone who already decided they're not wrong. So I hung up, stood there for a second, looked at that court again, bright white lines cutting through what used to be forest floor, and I made 2 calls. One to a demolition crew, and one to my attorney. Because if someone's going to drop a slab of concrete on your land and call it an upgrade, you don't negotiate, you respond. And here's the part that really gets me. While I'm pulling documents, gathering proof, lining up legal action, these people start using it. Like full-on using it. Weekend games, music blasting, neighbors invited over, cars parked along the edge of my forest like it's some public park. I walked over there once, told them straight, you're trespassing on protected land. And Evan just shrugs, ball in hand, and says, my lawyer said we're fine to use it. That right there. That's not ignorance. That's strategy. That's someone betting you won't push back hard enough. And maybe that works most of the time, just not this time. Because what they didn't understand, what they completely underestimated, is that conservation land doesn't play by casual rules. You don't just fix it later. You don't work it out. You either respect it, or you get removed from it. And at that point, I was already setting the clock. Now let me pause the story for a second, because what happened here, it's not just some wild neighbor dispute. This is actually textbook behavior when property lines, ego, and money collide. According to standard procedure, before you build anything, especially something permanent like a concrete structure, you're required to verify boundary lines through a certified survey, not just eyeball what looks and used. And when conservation easements are involved, the rules get even stricter because you're not just dealing with ownership anymore. You're dealing with legal restrictions tied to the land itself, meaning even the owner has limits, let alone the neighbor. From a legal perspective, what Evan did wasn't just trespassing. It crossed into what's called encroachment with permanent improvement, which courts take very seriously because it alters the land in a way that isn't easily reversible, or at least not cheaply. Now here's where it gets interesting on the psychological side, because this is a pattern I've seen before. This is a psychological trap called confidence escalation. Basically, someone makes a bold move, convinces themselves it's justified, and then doubles down when challenged instead of backing off. You saw it in the phone call, right? Friendly at first, then defensive, then aggressive. That shift isn't random. It's ego protecting itself. And once they started hosting games on that court, that was the commitment point. Because now it's not just a bad decision, it's a public one. Backing down would mean admitting fault in front of everyone they invited over. And people hate that more than they hate being wrong. So instead, they lean harder into the mistake, hoping you'll be the one who gives up. The lesson here is, situations like this aren't really about land at all. They're about control. Who gets to define reality? Who gets to say what's acceptable? And who blinks first? And if you don't understand that part, you'll lose before the legal process even starts. So once I understood exactly what I was dealing with legally and psychologically, I stopped reacting emotionally and started moving strategically. First thing Monday morning, I sat down with my attorney. Daniel Hayes, sharp guy, doesn't waste words, the kind of person who reads a land survey like it's a grocery list, and we went through everything. Old maps, easement documents, county records, satellite overlays, the whole stack. And within maybe 20 minutes, he leans back, taps the page, and goes, "Yeah, they're in trouble. Not, maybe, not we'll see, just done." According to the documentation, that trail didn't just sit on my land. It was specifically protected under a conservation easement that restricts any form of structural development, which means what they built wasn't just in the wrong place. It was illegal by design. And here's the kicker. Because of that protection status, I didn't need to wait for months of court back and forth to act. There's a legal pathway, injunctive relief, that allows immediate enforcement when protected land is being actively violated. Translation, we could shut this down fast. So Daniel drafts a formal notice, sends it over to Evan and Marissa, gives them 5 days to remove everything. Court, lights, foundation, all of it. Or we escalate. Now, if you're a reasonable person, that's the moment you stop, reassess, maybe call your contractor and figure out how badly you messed up. But remember what I said about commitment? About ego? Yeah, they doubled down. Their response didn't even come directly from them. It came from a law firm. Real polished language, trying to spin the whole thing as an improvement of previously unused land, offering me shared access to the court like they were doing me a favor. I actually laughed when I read that, because at that point it wasn't even insulting anymore. It was delusional. So Daniel didn't entertain it. He filed immediately, motion for injunctive relief, emergency basis. And while all that paperwork is moving through the system, guess what Evan does? He throws a tournament. I'm not kidding. Weekend comes around, and suddenly my forest sounds like a high school championship. Music blasting, people shouting, cars lining the edge of the property. I walked out there once, just stood at the edge of the trail, watching strangers run drills on what used to be protected ground, and I told him, calm as I could, "You're trespassing." And he doesn't even stop dribbling, just looks at me and says, "We've got legal coverage." That moment, that's when I knew he genuinely believed he was untouchable. And people like that, they don't stop until something stops them. For weeks later, that something showed up in the form of Judge Harold Bennett. Now this guy, he wasn't just any judge. He had a background in environmental law, spent years dealing with land protection cases. So this wasn't new territory for him. We walked into that hearing with everything lined up, clear boundary surveys, easement documentation, photo evidence, timeline of construction, and honestly, it didn't take long. I remember the judge flipping through the documents, quiet for a bit, then looking up and saying, "This is not ambiguous." That's the word he used, ambiguous, meaning there was no gray area, no room for interpretation. He stated clearly that the structure violated conservation restrictions and was built on land that did not belong to the defendants. And then came the part that mattered most. He authorized immediate removal. No delay, no grace period, no let's negotiate. Immediate. That word hit different, because now it wasn't just my position, it was enforceable authority. So I didn't wait. Next morning, literally the next morning, I had the demolition crew on site. Carlos ran that crew, been doing concrete removal for years, the kind of guy who looks at a slab and already knows how it's coming apart. They rolled in early, trucks, equipment, jackhammers, saws, and before we even started, we did everything by the book. Conservation officer notified, documentation on hand, court order printed and ready. No shortcuts, no mistakes, because if you're going to take something down like this, you do it clean. Then it started. First hit of the jackhammer echoed through the trees. Not gonna lie, there was something almost surreal about it, like watching the land take itself back. Concrete cracked, split into sections, rebar exposed and cut out piece by piece. The painted lines disappeared first, then the smooth surface turned into jagged fragments. Then those fragments got loaded into trucks and hauled off. The light poles came down next, unbolted, lifted out, wires disconnected. And underneath all of it, we dug. Because you don't just remove what's visible, you restore what's underneath. Base layers, compacted gravel, everything stripped until we reached natural soil again. 10 hours, that's all it took for that entire court to stop existing. 10 hours to erase what they thought was permanent. And we didn't stop there. Over the next 2 days, we stabilized the ground, reintroduced native soil, re-cleared the trail path exactly where it used to run. By the end of it, if you didn't know what had happened, you'd think the forest had never been touched. And that's when Evan and Marissa showed up, right as the last truck was pulling out. I saw them walking up the trail, and the moment Evan realized what he was looking at, or not looking at, I should say, his face just drained. Like all the certainty he had built up over those weeks just collapsed. Then came the shouting. You destroyed private property. Do you know how much that cost? The usual script. He pulled out his phone, said he was calling the police, and I just handed him the court order. Didn't raise my voice, didn't argue. Just pointed to the line that said immediate removal authorized. And I told him, there was no waiting period. That silence after that. Yeah, that was louder than anything he'd said before. But he wasn't done. A couple weeks later, he tried to sue, claimed damages, construction costs, materials, about $47,000 total. And honestly, at that point, it felt like a formality. Because when the case came back in front of the judge, it didn't last. Dismissed. Not reduced, dismissed. And not only that, he was ordered to cover my legal fees, plus an additional $12,000 in penalties. So yeah, the court he built, gone in 10 hours. The money he tried to recover, gone in one ruling. And the trail, still there. Exactly where it's always been. So yeah, that's how it ended. No dramatic handshake, no apology, no, we learned our lesson moment. Just silence, paperwork, and a piece of land quietly returning to what it was supposed to be all along. And I've had a lot of people ask me since then, was it worth it? The stress, the legal fees up front, the confrontation, all of it. And the honest answer is, yeah, it was. But not for the reason most people think. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't even about the basketball court itself. It was about something a little harder to explain, something you don't really notice until it's threatened. Boundaries. Not just physical ones, but the idea that those boundaries actually mean something. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. A lot of situations like this don't escalate because of the original mistake. They escalate because one side assumes the other won't push back. And most of the time they're right. People avoid conflict. They rationalize. They say it's not worth the fight. And slowly, piece by piece, they give up ground, literally and figuratively. And that's exactly what Evan was betting on. He wasn't just building a court. He was testing a limit, seeing how far he could go before someone stopped him. And for a while it worked. He got the structure up, he used it, he normalized it, he brought other people into it. That's how these things spread. They become real simply because they exist long enough without resistance. But here's the part most people miss. The longer something like that goes unchallenged, the harder it becomes to undo. Legally, socially, psychologically, it all starts to stack against you. Which is why timing matters. The lesson here is, when you know you're in the right, when you have documentation, when you understand the rules, when you've done the work. You don't wait for the situation to become convenient. Because it won't. You act while the facts are still clear and before the narrative gets twisted. Now, from a legal perspective, this situation was actually pretty clean. Clear boundary lines, documented easement, obvious violation. But even then, it still required action. The system doesn't enforce itself. You have to initiate it, you have to follow through, and you have to be willing to see it all the way to the end. And that's the part people hesitate on. Because it's uncomfortable. It takes time, energy, sometimes money up front. But what's the alternative? Letting someone redefine your property because they were confident enough to try? That's not how this works. And on the psychological side, this is something I want you to really think about. When someone dismisses your concern early on, laughs it off, minimizes it, tells you it's not a big deal, that's not just personality, that's positioning. That's them setting the tone for how much resistance they expect. This is a psychological trap, because if you accept that framing even once, you're already negotiating from a weaker position. You start questioning yourself, second-guessing whether it's worth it, whether you're overreacting. And meanwhile, they're moving forward like nothing's wrong. That's why clarity matters. Not aggression, not escalation, but clarity. Knowing exactly where you stand, what you can prove, and what you're willing to enforce. And I'll say this too, not every situation needs to go nuclear. Some things can be talked out, resolved early, handled with a conversation. But that only works when both sides are operating in good faith. The moment someone tells you to lawyer up, believe them. Because they just told you exactly how they plan to play the game. At that point, it's not about convincing them anymore. It's about documenting, protecting, and executing. And maybe the biggest takeaway here is that respect for boundaries isn't automatic. It's reinforced through consistency, through action, through the willingness to stand your ground when it actually matters. Because if you don't define your limits, someone else will. So now I'm curious, what would you have done in that situation? Would you have tried to work it out longer, or gone straight to legal action? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read more of them than you'd think. And if you've ever dealt with neighbors like this, or just want more stories where things get a little complicated, hit like, subscribe, and stick around. Because trust me, this kind of thing happens more often than people realize.